Okay, I've started my recorder and I'm going to go ahead and take up where we left off. We had been talking about initiation with the throat, and we've spent a lot of time on the throat, and I do want to get to conditioning of the definition, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Maybe the interruption of that was a blessing in disguise, just to be able to do that. Because a defined throat, it just says that we have a consistent, reliable way, we have a fixed style of speaking and acting. We still have to use our strategy and authority to find the correct timing for communicating and taking action. And so that's part of what happens. You can start giving your energy away to every little impulse your mental mind comes up with if it's really kind of coming from outside of the need for that communication at the time. And an undefined or an open throat, you really can remain quiet, and you don't have to act until initiated to speak or do something. And at times it may not happen, the way you would like or the way you think it might happen. But when it happens, and you don't need to be concerned about what you're going to have to say at the time. You can find that an open throat, it's hard to put a boundary around that. And so, but it's also something to know how much you're openly learning about communication manifestation without necessarily having to be the one doing it all the time. Transformation or metamorphosis, it doesn't happen all the time. It happens in spurts, just like growth. When you were little, you may have gone through growth spurts. Well, biologically, it's having to do with, the nature of when growth is appropriate and when it isn't. So you can be trying to be a manifester when you've got an undefined throat. You can be trying to be a manifester if you have a defined throat and you're not a manifester. These things are just things to start to take note of. So let's look at definition, but before we do, I'd like to just step back and just recognize something, that even though we don't really go into more details about biology and the functioning of the 9 centers, you do that more so going a little deeper in that in rave cartography. The point is really that first sentence at the top: when you don't operate according to your strategy and authority, you can put your health in jeopardy. It doesn't matter if it's defined or not. Because all of us are aware of people in our life who may have had a certain defined center, and yet the biology behind that center could show up as an issue in their life. That was certainly the case of Steve Jobs, who was emotionally defined and contacted a disease that I think was also affecting his pancreas. And it was obvious that there was things that he learned deeply at the end of his lifetime that he wished he had known all along, or wished that he had kind of chilled out a little bit more and wasn't so pushing all the time and trying to be spontaneous all the time when he was emotionally defined. So I'm gonna let Rick in. Hang on just a second. Ginger said, again, I was trying to let Rick in, and here we go. Welcome, Rick. And so if you have an organ removed, does that affect the center? I've had that question come up, even a woman who had a hysterectomy, and so at this point, Ginger, just think of these as biological correspondence. It doesn't mean that now an organ's gone, that center has got this big hole in it. You know what I mean? It's like the functionality of how things can change can be different. Whoops, sorry. Let me go back to resuming the share, and also going to try to clear the drawings. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. So yeah, just know that that can affect you, and again, Laura said that you've been diagnosed with some things and allergies. What I would recommend at this point is not to put a lot of mental pressure on trying to figure out if you're being right or wrong, but just focus in on what you can do to try to align very much correctly with strategy and authority right now, because it can be that you're trying to process things that normally your body can't process because of transiting fields or conditioning fields. And you can be learning an awful lot about things through that experience that could be correct for you. It could bring you to a place of wisdom about it. So rather than trying to decide, is this a judgment of me being good or bad, just notice it as an experience you're learning through right now. I've had experiences with my transits that had deeply affected my throat center, as an example, and it affected some of the testing that came back in an annual exam with my thyroid. And he tried to give me some medicine for it, and I had a response, no, I didn't want the thyroid medicine at the time. And I can't tell you why I responded not to, but I didn't. But it was just a temporary experience where I was under undue, more than normal pressure, which would show up in the test. But I think it's very dangerous when you start your experiment to start to jump into quick diagnostic conclusions. Do you know what I mean by that, Laura and Ginger? Because I would like for you to be careful about that. Just know that there's many different implications or causes. And so getting attention for it and then really trying to, again, take care of yourself is what I would highly recommend, because it can affect you. It can put you in jeopardy. And all of this is true. So yeah, what I'd like to then take a look at is the definition, and let's add to this a layer of how you can also be conditioned based just on your configuration. So whenever I talk about definition, there is, a term, that term means that we have a consistent life force energy that's transmitted out to other people in our aura. And if you're going to have a life force definition, that means you're always going to have at least a channel. I was just looking at it popped up on the chat. My number is 56, which is related physically to the thyroid and the spleen. This is what really got my attention when I began exploring this. I hear you about focusing on what is healthy response. Good, okay. Yeah. Again, you really were just so premature. This knowledge goes deep, and at this stage it would be premature to start to make conclusions and diagnostics that yeah, because we're starting at a place that has really already been conditioned, and it takes a while to undo a lifetime of conditioning. In fact, there's areas that won't be undone, in terms of the effect. And it doesn't mean that you can't still be yourself and learn from that, and that could be a correct thing to learn. So, yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day. There you go. So for definition, there has to be a channel involved for there to be definition. So you'll see here that something called none, which is an example of someone that has no channels defined in their body graph, that's, roughly the same percentage of its reflectors. Single definition is about 40%. We've got the biggest population of people with a split. A triple split is, I hear some background noise. Could you all, just since we had to come back in, double check your audios, please, just to mute so that we don't have that on the recorder. And then we have 11% with triple, and one of the rarest of them all, which I actually do have in my this semester's ABC class, is a quadruple split. And you're not going to find a lot of those. You may know someone who's a quadruple split. It means that they have, well, I'll show you what it means with the slide, but they are even more rare than even a reflector. So definition, and this is just a snapshot of the different possibilities. You'll see the one on the upper left-hand corner is the reflector chart. That's going to have no channels in their definition. The single is where you can basically see channels that are all interconnected. That means that they define the centers they connect, and there's a flow of energy that integrates all of those centers through those channels and movement of energy throughout the entire thing. You could put your pencil down on that G center in that upper right-hand corner, and you can move it to the throat, down to the solar plexus, up to the ego, down again to the split, to the root center, and up to the sacral. And it's one consistent flow that integrates all of that, those centers, as one expressed definition, even though the way it would function would be, oriented towards, a strategy and authority that comes from that definition. Now, if it's split, there is a breaking into different compartments. You could call them islands, kind of like in the ocean, you've got these islands that pop up. And so you can move around the island, but you can't get off the island to go to the other island without some kind of a bridge, without some kind of a mechanism to connect them. And that means they can be isolated. They can be functioning in an isolated way. So this person with a split could have their mind and, their head, their ajna, their throat, and their solar plexus all sort of integrated in how it comes together for them. But it's split off from how the pressure to be spontaneous through their splenic awareness works. And without a bridge between those, that integration can make it feel like something's missing. Something's wrong with them that they've got to fix. And a triple split has 3 islands, basically, that are somewhat integrated separately, and a quad would have 4. And it doesn't mean that just because of the picture, the auras are these different colors. That's just for your own example of being able to see the differences. And certainly you can have all 9 centers and be a triple split. You could have them all 9 defined. You could have, an open center with a quad like you see here. You can have them all defined. It's the separation that we're talking about. Well, that's an interesting observation, Annette. The bridge for the split is in your throat. Yeah, and we're going to look at that as we go through the charts. That's why I saved the charts for being able to look at that, because each of these kinds of definitions has a very different focus on where their conditioning can also come in. And you may not have thought about that. So I want to add that to the open center conditioning discussion. So here's no definition. That means it's a reflector. We have an example of a reflector. Here's Jessie. And so where's the deepest conditioning coming for Jessie? After, all these weeks of looking at 9 centers being open, you could say, wow, Jessie, you're, really, all over the place with that not self. And yet for Jessie, her aura, the way she operates as a reflector type, is different than those of us that have definition. She has a different way she takes in conditioning. The conditioning that affects Jessie the most, the real potential for not self for Jessie, is really coming from the deepest conditioning, which is the transiting field of neutrinos, the programmatic way that, moving through life, the different transits activated in that moment, in the just now moments of life. That's what is more deeply conditioning Jessie than any of these other, people that might come and go in her aura. And so I wanted to just, step back and acknowledge that, but also show you something, Jessie. And that is that this is what was happening. I had timed it so that without all these issues, we would have actually hit this closer to the time. But this happened, I would say, about, maybe 45 minutes ago. And so many of these are still activated now. And so this would be what we call a transit chart, which is the imprinting taking place through these various planetary influences, but neutrinos passing through. This is the transit of that time. And so if we take the transits and put them in a composite with Jessie, this would be the just now conditioning. This conditioning of all of this emotional energy, this manifesting energy, it's a chart of a manifester. She may have more energy today than normal. I mean, we don't always have her come to class, and then there she was. And, it's a shame that with the, you are there, good. Yeah, so I don't know if you can feel all this, in your system, Jessie, but the mind is certainly going, right? Looking at the patterns, looking at the future, looking at the doubts, I mean, this is going on, and so when you see Jessie and she's running around going, manifesting this and manifesting that and under, 3 motors, and the mind going crazy, this can be very, very much a factor in her setting up and thinking she can willfully commit to this or commit to that and, support her community and do this and do that. All these themes could just take her mind and she could run off and not wait a month to decide. And so it can change. It can change and again, the best way to know what the transits are is to just do a just now chart, but only use the black, because that's the only thing happening in the now, in the moment. And so that's how you would find out, Jessie, what's going on in the transit, is just do a chart as if someone was born just now, but only take the column that is coming from the personality side and then put that in connection with you, and you'll start to see what can happen. And you're not here to have consistency. You're here to go through a journey of patterns of your life in connection with that, because that's where you get deeply conditioned. So it's just something we'll talk more about when we get to reflectors. So when you look at a single definition, there is an integration of all of who they are, so the focus in their mind is not on who they are. It all seems kind of normal. Nothing's missing there. But what is going to be the connection with the outside world is going to be the open centers. And so for a single definition who can, kind of be with other single definitions and be completely integrated with who they are, the focus will be on open centers. And so those of us that have open centers in the class, Cecilia, you're the first one that I'm coming to. If you go back and consider this journey we've been on, what it says is that the open centers for you would be the focus of conditioning, more so than the transits, although the transits can also affect you. And would you agree with that for yourself? What, Cecilia, if you don't mind just saying a word or two, I know you've got an open throat, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Which of these centers right now have you felt you're really going through the most deconditioning of, or noticing the most conditioning of? Anything that comes to mind? feel free to unmute yourself if you, or you can just do a chat. That's fine too. The throat. Yeah. I can see that could be really quite a thing. And you even mentioned that you felt invisible when you weren't off, had the opportunity to say. And sometimes you can't stop speaking. And it's something that you're starting to notice. Good for you. Good for you, because you can have the pressure there in your throat, but the thing is, you don't have to take action on it. Try that. It can be difficult, I know. But see what happens when you don't. It's a miracle sometimes to know what would be said or would be experienced if you didn't allow every impulse to have its way. So keep watching this experiment, because it's really opening you up to some deep wisdom when it comes to the manifestation of things, the communication of things, and just the life you're here to have. So in meetings, people expect me to talk because of things I know, but I just don't think that it's necessary to repeat things. Yeah, that you could just say, I think what's been said is really valid. Just confirmation. And then and then people don't think you're withholding. But you have to just, for yourself when it's an appropriate time, when there's something to say, and when it isn't, because you've got the wisdom there to know the difference. Anything more you'd like to say at this time? What do you think? Do you feel complete? There you go. Okay. Emma has a single definition, and so the open centers, again, would be the focus. And I'm just looking to, again, see if there, yeah. I was just noticing you felt at peace with not saying something, because enough's been said, right? You've said what you had to say, and that's appropriate. So for Emma, I don't know, Emma, what you're feeling at the time. I know you've gone through lots of pressures, and you've talked about there's times you just really had to retreat. And again, there's been an incredible amount of pressure on certain, even with transits, but even with people in our lives, this demand that we put on ourselves, demand that maybe your mind puts on yourself to have to, do all these things, the pressures maybe you experience. Look at all these open centers. All of that is, you don't have to be under pressure to communicate if you don't want to. You don't have to be in a position to feel certain things if the timing's not there. It's just you being in the moment, waiting for the response, waiting for what you will respond to, what you can commit to, and just trusting that that can be correct in how it manifests. You can be correct in just being. You don't have to do. That's another way to see this unfold for you. And sometimes that is, being is enough. It truly is. So would you like to share a little bit when you've got the energy, Emma, on where you are in that process of observing the open centers? Which open center gets to you at this time? They can change. Now, for those that have a split definition, again, there can be a feeling that it takes a little longer to integrate the sides of who you are, or the places within you. And there could be a difference in how you react to things if you're not following your strategy and authority. And so Cheryl's here as a guide, and I won't have you share at the moment, Cheryl, since we've got so many charts to go through, but just so everyone knows, yeah, she would have just 1 or 2 gates that would connect her chart, her mind, to her splenic center, and the mind, of course, also associated with the G center. So this pressure to have these, gates fulfilled that would connect that will be the focus of conditioning, more so than the actual centers themselves. You may not realize that the centers will contribute to conditioning, but the bigger conditioning is the gate, and there could be multiple gates, but a single simple gate in which the theme of that gate can take over your life because you think you've got to fix that in yourself. You feel like something's missing and it must be that. You can spend your whole life thinking you have to have more and more and more and more skills because the gates of skills can actually connect that split. So we can go to the next chart and see Annette is another example of a simple split. There is a connection between the head center, the ajna center, the throat center, and the emotional center, all the way to the ego. But she's a generator, and her response from her sacral center to her G center is cut off from the emotional connection that goes all the way through the other centers. And so where's the focus of pulling those together? Well, it could be on her feeling of the 8th gate. It can be, this throat center that will allow her unique expression that will make everyone realize how differently unique she is. That she is different from everybody else and what she can contribute. And that can be, as Annette said, 8 is a feeling that could run her life through not self in feeling like she's got to find her own unique voice. And until she does, something's wrong with her. It could be just a pressure to, I don't know how it's manifested in your life at this point. And, the themes associated could be quite openly, communicated. But does it feel like that 8 gate is an area, a deep area of conditioning for you, Annette? Have you noticed patterns there? Because it can feel like it's missing. This unique voice, this ability to be seen as special and different, and, different things can show up. And people, you can be deeply connected to people who have that. It doesn't have to be just something that you notice within yourself, but something you're driven to find. You're always looking for that. You're looking for the people who have that. Well, integration of interests. So these kinds of things, if you look at it, the open centers can contribute to that. But for a split definition, they can become very, very subtle conditioning influences that pull you away from waiting for, what your clarity will bring over time. Yeah, so how do you take, what I think I see you saying, Annette, is how do I take all these interests I've had, all these things I know, and how do I get them across as my unique contribution? Is that kind of what you're saying? Ah, yeah. Well, maybe it's not about the manifestation of that. For you, it's about just, again, over time, just being so experienced in a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that when invited, you can share a little bit of the experience of this and that. They don't have to be integrated. Do you see how that 8 might say it has to be uniquely integrated? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just gets pulled from you when it needs to be pulled from you. And there's nothing wrong with you needing to have more and more different experiences. And yeah, just seeing what life pulls out of you. Did you want to contribute anything more at this time about that? I'm taking our time today because this is, I know, one that you've all been waiting for. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Rachitra, see again, this is where my voices can be limited. We've got another single, and I call it a simple split. And do we see, you know what, I don't see it. It's a single definition. It's not a split. Sorry about that. I put it in the wrong spot. So again, this would be the open centers. And so which of these open centers, or they could be all four all together, all five actually together. What have you been observing over the past few weeks for yourself? Where do you think your focus of conditioning is coming from right now that you're really noticing out of all these open center themes? Anything you'd like to share? I have limited access to our roll here. Just scrolling down to see if she's still with us. Nope. Then I would love to hear what you have to share on the forum, if you don't mind. And yeah, I would just say that she can pick any one of those. And what I've also noticed is, to me, it's kind of like having, when you have this, I have 5 open centers too, and once one starts in, it's kind of like a bunch of kids in the back seat of a car. One's making a lot of noise, but you don't know which one it's coming from, and then they all chime in. And then one, it's like opening the door and they can all say, well, I want to turn too. You really can't tell sometimes. It's not as if they all stay separate. They just all jump on the pile. This can make it even more complex in terms of recognizing the themes. But one of the things you can do is to just, again, become the observer. Knowing these themes gives you little strings that you can follow and examples of what your strategies in your mind have become that lead to that. So if we look at Radka, we have the emotional center going to the throat, and this is another example of a single definition. So where would the conditioning be coming from for you, Radka? Would you like to take an opportunity to share with the group? So we invite you to do that on that forum. I would just take a look at the chart as ourselves and realize, well, she has both the pressure centers open, and she's here to really wait out her wave, and yet the pressures of the world around her that her mind says she has to prove herself, she has to really, again, worry about the moment and the fears of responsibility and being responsible for others. That can take a toll on her, feeling like she can wait. She can feel like she can't wait. Manifesting generators can be very impatient, feel they need to be manifesting, and with a very deep active throat and response mechanism, she can be pulled into premature action, even though she has a defined throat. So these kinds of things can show up in very misaligned ways. And so it really does take a lot of time and deconditioning to start to weave your way through. Jasper is split definition, and so we look for where the split is. Jasper, have you noticed this before? Are you aware of what defined that for you? Yeah, a lot of interesting interactions with people with the 7 in a defined G center. Other people that bridge your gap. I've been paying a lot of attention to it. One of the things that I usually kind of caution people about is when you start learning about your split, there's a tendency in some forums, I've noticed people say, gee, I'm looking for, it's almost like genetically you're very attracted to people that would bridge the split, but you don't have to go looking for it. Truly, you can just follow your strategy and authority, wait for, for life to bring to you those people that will complete certain ways of you pulling things together, you can learn an awful lot. In fact, think about that openness. If it's not pulling you away from who you are, it's giving you an enrichment of experiences with lots of different themes of Gate 7, or lots of different themes that have to do with well, anything, even whole channels. And it can lead you to learn an awful lot about leadership without an attachment, being a certain way, or just being someone that can influence things when it's the right time, when it's the right invitation. Even though you're a generator, you'll be pulled into correct experiences that can help you see who is a good leader, perhaps. Does this resonate? Do you notice? And then, of course, all the open centers will contribute their own not self, fears and, need to prove yourself. Maybe you're all caught up in thinking something's wrong with me if I'm not a really good, strong leader. I need to prove myself. I need to, do something that's going to, take the pressure off of me. And that's what's wrong with me. That's what I have to fix. And I need the skills to be able to fix that. I mean, you can really start going down all kinds of rabbit holes. And it says, but I've learned now that it isn't necessary anymore. Absolutely not necessary. In fact, planning, is not so necessary for you. You're not a, particularly good planner, I would say, in the essence of what your mind might think is required. And that can also be something that you're always looking for, is I just need a plan. If I had a plan, if I knew where I was going, if I had the direction laid out, then everything would fall into place. Yeah. See, this is where we get caught, because the mind thinks it knows what it's doing. So it's so interesting. What about the other small questions? Any questions come to mind? Okay. So for Richard, it just took a little longer. So you can see how much influence a person with a 7 can have, because suddenly you feel like your plan is solid. Your direction is solid. And all of a sudden you are a leader, and you just had needed to wait until you had all the right ingredients to have it come together. And it can come and go as ways to learn and grow and be yourself without getting caught in, now when it goes away, something's wrong with you. It's my fault. Do you see how that becomes a habit, a not self habit? Yeah. So for Richard, it's a split that is quite, interesting, because again, this need for skills and more skills, more skills, more skills may or may not be true. You're just someone with depth, Richard. You're someone that can know what needs to be corrected. It doesn't mean you have to do it. Never thought about that sometimes when you're caught in the not self, needing to prove yourself or be in control, or overwhelmed with emotions, or the mind feeling like I need to be certain, and I need something to be inspired through, or the inspiration that comes from others that says that when you watch someone who's able to use their skills in a way that you feel is lacking for you, that can really again affect you. And yet it's not about that for you. You have so much more going on. And the pressure to be the one, I look at this chart because I have analyzed charts, because I have further knowledge than just this class. And I can see someone who's here starting things all the time and feeling like something's wrong because they can't finish them. And that comes from splits. It comes from feeling like something's wrong with you. because you jump from one thing to the next. Does that resonate for you, Richard? Because not everybody needs to finish. We do need people that are good at starting new things, but they don't all need to finish them. Even though you have a plan, the plan can be just some things you share with others. Does that make sense to you? Something to just watch, because the open centers will jump in. They'll jump in. So we're just all in our own journeys of unraveling all of these potentials of not self, and yet true self will give you everything you need, and it'll come and go sometimes in a way that's enriching for you. So for Mona, we are split here. So you've got the emotional energy going to the throat, cut off from the sacral response, going to the splenic center. And so there can be like a little private war going on inside of there. This need to kind of step back and wait shows up over and over, because and yet there's an impulse to immediately manifest. And that may or may not give you enough time for clarity over time. So where is the bridge? Well, there's a couple of them. You could either feel like you need more depth, getting that throat all the way to the splenic center, or you could feel like you need more intimacy. Your feeling of really needing to connect and have a deep emotional connection with others, and this need for intimacy, and yet once it's there, almost even a way of sort of sabotaging it, like wanting it, but then don't come too close, don't get too close to what could hurt, because those things just are drawn to the openness. There's different other ones that could be. It could be, the power in the now, that would be the 57, or the need to be intuitive in the now. All of these things are they're little sneaky. Actually, that one doesn't connect you. Sorry about that. That was a mistake on my part. It can be triggered, in combination with that, but the real connecting gate would be the 6th gate for you. Not even the gate the gate of depth would also be one. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, Mona. I have the 16 without the 48 too, and the 48 does bridge my split. And so I'll share with you that it was a relief when I discovered I do not have to be the one that brings forward the depth of solutions, knowing what to do about everything that needs to be fixed. Because you're not here to be the one that is the well of solutions. You're here to take others' depth, and maybe skillfully, if you identify with them, be able to voice your own skillful way to express them. That's what human design has done for me. I have the 16, I don't have the 48. I took the 48 from Ra and the human design system, and I'm communicating the depth that isn't coming from me. It's coming from a system that has depth. That's why I'm attracted to it. But I'm not caught having to go deep in it. I can be on the surface and just, let that expression of experience and experimenting come to light. Does that make sense, Mona? Because that can make you feel like something's wrong with you, that you don't have that depth, especially when you're a 5-1 and investigating and building a foundation for depth. So it's just an interesting thing to step back and see what can happen with all of these conditioning influences. It's just fascinating to me. It's the magic of human design and the depth. That's why I'm so attracted to it. So again, being aware of the tendencies.
My keyboard has died, so can I talk for a minute?
Sure.
The interesting one for me is the 63-4, because I'm I used to be always running around wanting to answer everybody's questions.
Mm-hmm.
And then I figured out that when I'm with the 63, we can just talk about possibilities and
Mm-hmm.
me not being right.
And not only not being right, but not having to do anything with it. You know?
Yeah, just talking for the sake of talking.
Yeah, if it's correct for both of you at that time and you have the energy for it.
Yes, very interesting.
Because look, your mind is just there to think about formulas, not necessarily do anything with them. There's no energy to
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet we can be so pulled into, especially when you're a very splenic, defined, powerfully, responsive kind of generator. Be careful. That's not your authority. It's not. So we'll look at authority in our next class. So we'll, start to see that too. But yeah, this is where we get pulled into our conditioning. Our need to connect, our need to do this, our need to then initiate that, which may not be the right time. And that's what we start to notice when we start to peel back the layers to recognize where we get pulled into our deepest level of conditioning. That can be more about your conditioning than the ego and the G and the head. It really can. It's that sixth gate can be a powerful influence for you.
Okay,
So
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. For Pam, another split, we've got the powerful mind and, all the way down to the throat. And yet the authority for her is coming from up. There goes my connection again. That was weird. Make sure that I still got the recorder going. Okay. And, okay. Thank you, Ginger. So we have this connection. You have the same kind of conditioning that we were talking about before with the 48, where you could be looking and looking and looking for something that's, wrong with you because you don't have the right depth of bringing the solutions out, and thinking there's something that you are missing. So you have to, keep studying more and more different things or putting yourself under pressure to solve things, because your mind says, but you're a projector, you're there to guide, you need to have all the solutions to everybody's problems, and you need to be able to do it instantaneously and in the moment. And that's just a lot of pressure, and that's about energy that you would like to manifest. You've got two motors, but you're not here to necessarily do anything until the invitation is there. And until you've got, everything sort of recognized for what you are and who you are. So these things can pull you away from waiting for your clarity. Even when you finally get the invitation, it might not be the right invitation at the right time. So it's sort of an interesting experiment in learning about waiting. Does that make sense, by the way? Because man, you've got a lot to be recognized for. You have a lot to have an invitation for. And so it's trusting that you really are. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The 35th gate plays out too, because it makes you want to, you know, be the voice of experience, or to, bring progress, to basically manifest. How do I become the manifester? Mastery of mental manifestation. If I can think it, I can do it. You might be very attracted to works that talk about how to, whatever you think you can manifest. You may not recognize that. That could just show up in a very surprising way sometimes, but that's just what's so funny about life. We can just watch the mechanics roll out. You don't have to identify with that. Yeah, just hold back. You've got a lot of energy. Just, wait until it's time to commit. Wait until you feel clear in terms of the commitment and the community that recognizes you too. All of those things are really good for you because then you can be such an influence. Anything you'd like to share about that, Pam? Ah, okay. She said, I'm learning to wait. It's not easy. I know. I know. Never said it was easy. Simple, right? Never easy. So Roxana is a split definition. Lots of ways that can connect. That channel that is, about that unique voice, and yet, you know, it's actually, the more I look at it, it's not just a simple split, because you've got your root center to your solar plexus. It's got a ways to get up to the throat. You're like me, Roxana. You're a wide split. There's a little bit different way that manifests. It manifests meaning that you would need a whole channel in your case. So any one of these channels that gets you to the throat, and it could go up in many different ways. What happens with the wide split is there's like a disconnect between, this one theme that makes it feel like it's all your fault. And instead, it opens up this feeling that the blame is somewhere else. It's sort of out there instead of within you. And of course, all of that is still an illusion. And when you're operating as true self, you really do have an objectivity of where the blame is, or what is wrong, or what needs to be fixed. But when you're not self, it feels like everybody else needs to be fixed. And so these are the things to be aware of that are tendencies with splits, especially one that is not all focused on a certain gate theme, but a more objective conditioning theme that you feel is coming from outside of you. And I, just point that wide split out with, for me, I've got a long way to get to the throat from the sacral and the root. So back to your chart again. These are things just to be on the lookout for. And as a projector waiting for an invitation, you could even take that as something that you may feel bitter that you've got all this to offer, all these expectations of what, and desires for feelings and certain experiences with others, and you're told you got to wait. You got to wait for an invitation. Well, what does that look like? I've got all this energy. I'm ready to rock and roll here. And yet you're being told, no, wait. But I don't know if I'll get the invitation. I don't know if I'm worthy of the invitation. I don't know when enough's enough. I don't, have any real boundaries around fear, or I may be afraid of everything. And then the mind just, again, getting confused. These things can show up in again, adding to the confusion. Not quite sure what it means to have an invitation or when it can be recognized, because there's aspects of your nature, while you're focused on the other, you don't see within you. These are the things that can stop a person from relaxing and knowing you'll get your invitations when they're correct. And then it will be successful and something you can delight in, because you'll have this wonderful contribution to make, this unique creative voice that is there to be able to guide others in its own way. Which theme, again, when you look at them, you can have, do you notice people that you attract, Roxana, that have a way of bridging your big open areas? Have you ever noticed this before? This might be a new topic for you. So I'm just inviting you to kind of take some time and not go looking for people. She's not actually here, that's why I'm recording this, but don't go looking for people who have it, but notice how it feels when you're with people that bridge that. There can be a deep, deep attraction that doesn't want to give up, doesn't want to let go of that energy. And this relying on others can turn into quite a thing. So Ginger says, are projectors supposed to accept? Oh, no, just the correct ones that come from their own authority. Hi, Rick. I noticed that you wanted to come back in. So, yeah, they're not here for every invitation. Now, when you know you're waiting for an invitation and you get one, it's like, whoa, I got one. Why would I want to wait? Well, because it might not be the right energy you're going to take in. We're going to actually talk about projectors on our last class. So absolutely, but the authority we'll talk about next week. So moving to my chart, just so you can see an example, because I'm not going to spend much time. My wide split can actually be connected by two gates that and other ways too, but the 48 and the 18 are the areas that I have been deeply, deeply conditioned in my life. My only two really long-term, serious emotional connections, partners, even, my ex-husband, for example, and the only other person I had a really intimate, serious relationship with, both had the 48 and the 18. And so what that did is that created a conditioning for me. If I just was to kind of highlight this, it basically suddenly made me feel safe and secure just to be in their presence, because it connected my split, making me feel a defined splenic center. They both had a defined splenic center, and I felt codependent on that safety and security. It's like I would never, ever want to give that up. I always felt so good, I so connected, so, myself. And then when they weren't there, I thought, well, I must have done something wrong. I need to hang on to that. I need to have that for the emotional stability, because there was also a connection that was made to my solar plexus. So when you look at that, you start to see that, first of all, I don't need those connections to have a satisfying life. I don't need those connections to be here fulfilling my purpose, but I can learn a lot with people who have it. And I do tend to attract a lot of 48s and 18s into my life. And I've learned an awful lot about the splenic center as a result of having these influences. So just noticing that is something that it can bring an objectivity. And actually, I can be very good with splenic people, knowing where they are actually having some issues with their own personal, laws or rules that are not really healthy for them. You can start to become very objective and in support of others in that way. But you have to come from true self for that to work in a correct way. So I'll take a moment now to also show you some interesting things that, if I can get it to move. Having trouble advancing the slide now. Let me see what the chat says. Maybe that'll help. Yeah, I think it's our connection today too, Rick. I'm feeling it. There's just some fluky things going on with the system. I don't know where it's coming from though, and my wide split's not going to pretend it's everything else's fault, but I just don't know why. And I'm having trouble advancing the slide. There we go. So the triple split has a different kind of way of connecting, and it's coming from the bridges. It's not coming from, I'm sorry, it's not coming from the bridges like a regular split. They're really designed, if you think about, what they're here for, they're really designed to be moving through a wide variety of auras. Hi, Annette. I noticed that just like another student, you had trouble and needed to come back in. Just kind of an interesting day in this environment. But we're looking at the triple splits, and the triple splits can move in groups in a very healthy way. In other words, not so much that they're looking for partnerships like a split. We are really designed to become very knowledgeable about partnerships in splits when you're operating correctly as yourself, to understand we need each other. You know, they're really good at kind of recognizing the need for others than maybe others. But when you come to a triple split, you can imagine being this being that is designed to be very open and connect with people in many different ways. It's kind of like if you walk into a room, you would be the butterfly that goes from this person to that person and sort of experimenting with all these different ways to connect and never really needing to attach to one. In fact, it might even feel a little bit suffocating to just be with one person in the corner of the room all day long. You want the variety, you want the, you know, the differences that all these different hookups can bring. I'll be meeting with someone who's a triple split that I happen to bridge all of her splits. We've been, you know, friends for years and years and years, and I'll see her this weekend. And I know that we've already invited a third party to come to dinner with us because it's more comfortable for her. I used to feel very personally rejected when she would do that, because I felt like, well, aren't I enough? Don't you want, you know, just to see me? But I get that that's what is healthy for her aura and her triple split, and that's what makes her feel less antsy. But for me, I'm fine with just the one person. It puts me at a different kind of disadvantage to be in you know, groups than just be with her. But that's the nature of accepting variety. And so it's actually the open centers for a triple split where the focus of conditioning goes back to. And so for Laura, who's got the mind, you know, in its own little island, and the ego and the throat and the G center, you know, in its little island, and then the sacral response coming from another place, you know, these ways don't need to be fixed. They just all get integrated when you're with this movement in life that brings a focus of learning through so many connections with people, all about the splenic center and all about the emotional center. That would be the focus of conditioning. And Laura, do you have a feel on which of those two centers seems to be a big area for you in terms of conditioning? Or, I mean, they can be both, obviously, but anything in particular? Because I would imagine you've got lots of chances to feel very, very conditioned by a feeling of responsibility. Those fears out of this splenic center could be fears you're really, you know, again, feeling like you don't have the skills, or, you know, on and on and on. And so these are just things to be aware of, because if the focus is on that, the focus may not be on that subtle little response mechanism that that should be driving your car, you know, that should be, you know, what really, yeah, irons in the fire, because of feeling you're responsible for everybody and needing to take care of everybody. Be careful with that one. I've got that one mastered from the 50th gate of fear of responsibility. So it's just too much. Too much. You don't need to do that. And you only have so much energy, by the way. Even though you will yourself to keep your commitment, be careful that you're committing yourself to the right will, and let your sacral take over. And so for Rick, we have this manifester, and this manifester can feel like, you know, in our minds, this powerful being who's here to have an impact and know for themselves. And of course, he's got to know what his own clarity is before he puts it out there. And so if you've got a triple split and it goes back to the centers, pressure and fears, and even knowing when enough's enough can come into play. And it can really bring about especially when you've got a strong mind like you do. My goodness, the pressures. You've got all 3 pressure gates to think and to know. And the pressure to know can drive you to bring about, things. And especially when you've got the pressure coming from other people too, because that doesn't say wait for clarity. Oh, you can't help but think all the time. You're a thinker. That's you. And that's what you can be so wonderfully inspiring as a manifester, but you've got to wait to settle in. I can't wait for us to talk about the solar plexus authority next week, because your will, boy, once you commit to something, you're on the, you're going to have to follow through. And that could put you under the wrong pressure, and it could be emotional chaos, all those things we talked about. So we'll talk about correct decision making for you, Rick, because you're not waiting for the other. It's not about the other. It's about you waiting for your own clarity on what's going to manifest and the experience that's going to be manifested. It's going to have impact. It will. So Seema is going to have triple split as well. And again, a way of needing to make emotional decisions and not just willful decisions or sacral decisions. Those contribute to your ability to be what you're here to be. But it's, again, the open centers and the fears and the mind, those things can just really influence you. So be aware of the tendency to be pulled away. I was just reading what Rick had to also say, which is, I enjoy talking to different people and I don't stay in the same place. Yeah, you're moving through all of that. That's really healthy for you. It keeps your interactions more neutral too. And the undefined root, yeah, that one's the one that can be quite an influence. So, yeah. Now, just to finish up, I know we're running late today. I just wanted to, again, see if there's anything else. I want to also get to Ginger. Another triple split. I've never had so many triple splits in my class, by the way. So you've got your mind out there doing its mind thing. You've got your solar plexus connected with your ego doing its thing. You've got your sacral connected with its, pressure center and G center. And so when you are waiting, it's all kind of being integrated through all these neutral conditioning influences, you being in groups, being out in public, especially, if you really need to kind of move your energy a little bit, probably feels good. Would you say that's true for yourself, Ginger? But again, the focus for you, go ahead and talk about that splenic center.
Yeah, that and the irony of it is that for several years I've sort of been isolated at home a bit, and I feel like I'm going crazy.
Yeah. Well, you're not able to bring yourself to a place of neutrality. And you can learn so much about being out in the world, taking in, all of, being able to take a risk a little bit in terms of, what you can experience through the open splenic center being out in the world. What you take in of how people feel and their own insecurities and their own fears and their own sense of well-being or not well-being. All of those things are just breathing in and breathing out in a way you don't have to get attached to, but really truly learning about, living a life and taking a risk when it's the appropriate risk, not out of spontaneity, but out of a place of experience. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Because you've got so much to offer when you let life pull it all together from you, for you, and time will do that. It's always about time when it comes to that emotional wave. We're going to dive into that more fully because I know that's an area that's very, it can be very confusing for people trying to wait on that with that energy wanting to manifest. Anything more to share about your journey so far, Ginger?
I did mention that I had to have my stomach taken out, and that is with the ego center there.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that since that happened, the will and commitment has changed. So I know that you didn't specifically say that they are related, but
They
somehow
are
within
actually.
myself, it feels like it did make a difference.
It did. Yeah, they are related, Ginger. And my caution was just to make sure that other people don't jump on that as an instant concept that now they're going to go looking for everything to be on the surface. But you saw that over time, right? You're watching it, how it's integrating with, your life and your experience of life and just a lot of things about that. And I
Yeah.
think that's what was really correct about that for you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. See how much you're learning about health and well-being, whether you intended to or not.
Yes.
That open centers were right there taking it all in.
Oh, yeah.
Good. So there's one last one that I'll share with you all, and that is the quadruple split, that rare being that is going to be a little different than a triple split. It's not that they're here to sort of be in groups moving through all the different auras. It's actually them being someone who's here to transmit a very strong life force out into the world. They're not here to be really changed by a lot of people. They're here to really kind of put themselves out there. And as they do, they've got a vulnerability to conditioning through their bridges, just like a split does. So they can be very wise about what they are here to really transmit and to be sort of a kind of fixed, consistent, reliable life force expression of. And, for those of you who may have heard of a famous personality in the United States with their own talk show for many years, his name is Dr. Phil. His name is actually Phil McGraw. He is a quadruple split. He is a presence. They have this very strong presence, auric presence, almost authoritative kind of energetic presence. You know that he's going to be himself no matter what. And they're usually emotionally defined, so they have to take their time. But he's really not here kind of taking in conditioning from all over the place. He's really quite a force, and you either love them or you don't, because there's no wiggle room there. This is kind of what it is. So which one is a bridging gate? The undefined one? Yeah, the one that would pull together the definition. And in a quadruple split, it's a lot of them, right? You can see that it's ideas. And, the gate of ideas here, it's the, you can pull, and that's not going to pull together the whole chart. It's only bringing the mind to the throat. So they have so many different ways, they're bridges. They have lots of different ways to be with lots of different people, and that gets connected in different ways. So it's different than, it isn't just a partnership. It's more, them connecting in more of a public place again. And that's what we're looking at. So lots of different ways we can be conditioned, not just the open centers. And so as we wrap up today, do you have voices based on those gates we talked about that show up in your throat center, whether it's a defined throat center or an open throat center? You still have a certain consistency of your voice that will come out in a variety of ways, conditioned ways or defined ways. And do you notice when you tend to use them, or, when you're not using them, when you're kind of pulled into other voices? Just noticing. That's all I'm asking. And how have others maybe shared with you some constructive feedback in the past? Constructive in that there was themes that seem to repeat themselves that people bring up about you. And is there any kind of thematic truth in there that you might observe or notice, or even lead you to some maybe roots of conditioning that you had overlooked just because you were sensitive, or just because you didn't want to believe it, or just because of this or that? Are there just openings that we can examine to start to see some of these strategies that have become a routine way we think? What are those patterns or situations? Sometimes you can have a different experience of your conditioning from home, from work, because again, one might feel more personal than the other, or one might feel more threatening than the other. So you may be more willing to, let go of the conditioning in one and not the other. Just noticing these things. Yeah. And noticing that, if people are in that waiting for your contribution or an expectation, and you not having a clue, remember, it might be that you have to just trust that if it really is an invitation, that what you have to share might even start a process where it comes out with other people too. Do you know how that can happen? It's like you can say something that leads to someone else then having an inspired thought about it, because you're starting to inspire the direction of the conversation. So these are things that we're all here being able to take on as a fresh approach to living life, to see what really could be possible for your design. So we'll go into, now that we've really been exploring the not self and the pain it can bring, because it can if you're not operating as yourself, we'll start to look at where's the authority coming from within your life that leads you to navigate correctly. And then we'll finish up the last two classes with looking at type strategies. So we'll go through all of those authorities next week. And in the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your week, and yeah, have a fun experiment. Love yourself.
Carol,
And sure.
this is Mona.
Uh-huh.
I have the closest thing to a human design joke. Would you like to hear it?
Uh-huh.
Mind, I'm worried. Heart, just relax. Mind, but I'm totally lost now. Heart, just follow me. Mind, but you've never been there before. Heart, trust me, you'll love it. Soul/human design, if you two would just be quiet, I'd show you the map.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. So was it good for all of you to kind of take a look at these examples, these different, thank you, by the way, all of you who shared your chart who allowed us to share your chart. I know that it's not always comfortable to be, looking at your own chart. And some people, of course, do feel more comfortable with that. But thank you for your openness. It always gives us many different ways to see how different we are, and to open up the pathway to acceptance of differences of how we are too. Because every design we looked at today is perfect. If you're pulled into one way of looking at it, it's just one way of looking at it. But every one doesn't need to be fixed. They are an expression of who they are in their own right, in their own way, in their own beautiful, unique differentiation. And the more I recognized I don't have to become my split connections, I could really be comfortable with who I really am. I know. It was kind of funny, and it was also sad. I always like to have things run smoothly. And of course, I've had to learn in my lifetime how to let go of feeling like you can only prepare, but it's how you engage with life more than being prepared for life. Just letting go and surrendering to what life will bring can still bring a deeply satisfying experience if you let it. Yeah, you learn an awful lot. I've learned a lot about Zoom by watching things happen in different ways that I wouldn't have known. So here we go. See you guys next week, though. Bye for now. Oh, and just so you know, I'm going to have to do 2 uploads, obviously, because I've had to start 2 different charts. 2 different recordings. So see you guys later. Have a wonderful rest of your week.